Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Revolution Gathering. We are still in Galatians, and have a feeling we're going to be in Galatians for a little while. So get cozy, get comfortable, because that's where we're at. So last week, I talked a little bit about how we would focus on really the last part of Galatians 3, and that is going to be the main focus for today. So there you go. There you go. I had some questions. Questions for the audience. No, what was the question? What was I thinking? I don't know. My brain is gone. I think I have ADHD. Something that I wasn't, someone once thought that I had ADD, but I think I have ADHD. And I found this out by watching things about ADHD, and I'm hoping I'm not projecting. But then somebody sent me a book, and it kind of made me tear up. So I think I got to find whoever you find for finding out if you have ADHD and talk to them. It's been weird. There's just a lot of things. Like time, like before Revolution starts, I'm like all nervous and I'm pacing and everything like that. And then all of a sudden my phone's like, it's 11 and I'm already late, It's like time sometimes just really works weird for me. Like yesterday, the kids, we were, had a movie that we were going to at 2:30, and we had come home from, my son had a frisbee, ultimate frisbee game. And so we had like 2 hours. So we came home, had lunch and stuff. And I just just sit and just wait like, oh, okay, we got to go. We got to get movies at 2:30. We got to go. Anyway. And then it's like, oh, we got to go. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Hello, hippie Christian. I am sorry. I keep forgetting to get back to you on the Revolution Facebook page because I usually don't get a lot of DMs there. Most of the DMs I get are on my Jay Baker Facebook page or on my Instagram. So I haven't forgot. I haven't. I'm just easily distracted. Maybe I do have ADHD. So last week I noticed that my microphone is popping all over the place, and I'm not sure if that is a problem with the wire that I have, and I need to get a new, I do have a wireless one, or if it's coming from my jacket. I think, yeah, last time my jacket flipped open. But, let me know if it's poppy. Not that we can fix it today, but at least I'll know that it's with the microphone rather than worrying about flappy jackets. So if it's pop, pop, bitty pop, the mic is popping or making noises, let me know. I would be grateful to know that. So here we are, folks. The dream we all dream of. Revolution Gathering. So last week we ended with one of my favorite verses of Galatians. And that's Galatians 3:28. I think I have a lot of favorite verses in Galatians. But let me, one is because it's interesting how people have readings of it, how it's interpreted. I once had a apologetics person tell me like, well, it was an old prayer, blah, 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 and it came from this and this. And then I found out like he's trying to use it that it's not relevant because it was Paul quoting something. And then I found out that prayer he was talking about was actually not as old as the book of Galatians. So, boom. The guy was trying to put me in my place and be like, he was just quoting a prayer. He didn't really mean all people are actually equal. It's amazing what we do to try to make, like, there's a lot of crappy stuff in the Bible, if you want to find it. There's forgeries in the Bible and all that, but it's always wild to me that when people take scripture and really always try to twist it to make it like, oh, no, it's not as good as you think it is. We often, it seems there's always been this way of thinking like, how can we make it all work together and make it a little less inclusive. And so much so that when you look at the pastoral epistles, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus, that are not written by the Apostle Paul, but as someone pretending to be the Apostle Paul, and apologetics folks will often tell you, well, that was okay to do back in such and such time. They'll tell you, like, oh, you could do that back then. And then you find out from scholars, like, well, that's not really what's happening here. Is what's happening here is that you've got somebody who's trying to clean up some of Paul's mess. They feel that Paul's mess is grace, and it's a bit too messy, and it's a little bit too, this. So they try to reset up a hierarchy with the pastoral epistles. And so what we're talking about today goes right against that. And then all of a sudden you've got Paul being like, but actually the man is more important. And, a lot of my Calvinist friends really like that stuff. I don't. And it's very I feel it's more of a cultural thing than it is a biblical thing, but they really like that, kind of overt sexism. Or, we all have different roles, But Paul didn't say that. That wasn't Paul. But anyway, the point is like you could go and you can point out that stuff, but it's funny because they don't want that pointed out. But then they'll try to be like, oh no, this one that seems inclusive is not really inclusive. It's just an old saying. So, always trying to find a way to make it more exclusive. And today is all about inclusion. And not the warm, fuzzy, utopian version of inclusion either. This is it's not easy being inclusive. So some of this talk is also inspired by a book about Martin Luther King that I'm reading right now as well. Also want to say it's been really exciting to see all the protests that are going on over. I really wanted to be at the protest yesterday. I had my kids. I wasn't sure about bringing my 7-year-old daughter, so I just erred on the side of my kids. My kids are always first because I grew up in a home where kids weren't always first. My kids will come first. They will come before this work, and you'll have to just accept that. And hopefully you'll go, oh, I appreciate that. If you've seen the seen the wreckage of PKs over the world, but. So we did other things, but I would just want to say I'm really encouraged to see so many people speaking out in the world and for different causes. There's so many. We have so many to choose from now. But it's nice to see that people aren't letting the news just overwhelm them. That they're putting their actions, their worries to action, their words to action, and I think that's vitally important, especially as someone who follows the school of nonviolence. As we get into this, don't forget to like and subscribe. That always helps us. It really does. That's a way you can help support Revolution without money. You can just like and subscribe, and you can share it with your friends. But liking and subscribing and even turning on your little notifications help. So every time I turn this on or I upload a video, you will know right away. So, where are we? Galatians 3:28. And this is where we ended last week, and this is where we are, and I don't think we're going to make it very far. So we got a lot of Galatians to get into over the next couple months or weeks. We'll just see. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male and female, for you are one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's offsprings, heirs according to the promise. I remember literally 5 years ago, I had just moved here and I did a talk on this. And people got kind of pushed back. Back then we had, before my second computer got destroyed. And I don't have that now, but we had a separate computer and Caleb was here and Caleb was able to read the questions and the comments a little bit more, so I didn't just have them 1 second or 2 seconds in front of me. And there was a lot of pushback on this because it was really, we were talking about losing, letting go of your identity and letting go of identity politics. Now, that doesn't mean we become blind to each other's differences by any means. That's what makes us unique and special and even human is that we are all different and we have different backgrounds and race and country and sexuality. I mean, we're all different We're different human beings. It doesn't mean we ignore that. But what Paul is trying to say here is that there's no hierarchy within these anymore. There is really no major separation. So, when he says there's no longer Jew or Greek, he's really speaking to the Gauls and the Jewish Christians in Galatia, the Galatian church, is because he's saying you guys are separating over the fact that you're saying, well, there's your Gentile Christians and you're Jewish Christians and you're more Christian because you're Jewish and because you've practiced these, you've practiced the traditions and you've gotten here and you've also gotten you've done circumcision, you've done all these things, and so that makes you more of a Christian and more of a person than these Greeks. And so that's what Paul is saying is you're all one. Nobody's more important than the other. And just because you did more, just because you were born the chosen people doesn't make you have any hierarchy over the other people. Just because, you're not having a hierarchy over the adopted or those who have been grafted in. He's making that very clear. There's no pecking order here. And what's really very interesting about that is not just that. It would be, if you just left it at that, you'd be like, oh, okay, really just there's the letter and all this stuff. But Paul gets even more clear and he goes, there's no longer slave or free. So this is a big deal as well. Unfortunately, our biblical writers did not say a lot about freeing slaves and things like that, which we would hope would have happened. I have to just believe that it was they were choosing their battles or something. It was a culturally very different time as well. 2,000 years ago in the Middle East, very different. If you just go to the Middle East now, it's a very different culture. So, but he goes, but he's telling you, like, hey, you got to love these people. Like, you got to treat them like it. When you're a slave and you are at church, you guys are one. When you guys are together, you should be treating them and loving them as your neighbor, as yourself. So I think that's a kind of a going into the correct direction. And then it hits this one, which is really crazy, especially for the time that this was given, is, and there is no longer male and female. And there was a huge hierarchy between men and women. And here Paul is just tearing down this and saying you're all one in Christ. He's saying Jesus is the great equalizer, and then, it's so funny because I've seen like these really conservative churches put on, when I saw one on sign, was like, even Satan wanted equality with God, like the church for some reason has fallen into some sort of anti-Christian, anti-Christ way of thinking and thinks that even asking for equality is a sinful thing. Nicotine mints, folks. I quit smoking a couple years ago and I still like the nicotine. But so here we are. We've got this completely new situation. And if you look deeper into it, you can see that Paul worked with men and women equally and that type of thing. But he is literally saying we are one. And Christ has brought us together and we have no identities except that. And what Christ, how will they know you belong to me? What did you say? They will know you belong to me by your love for one another. So you really have a very interesting thing happening here. A group of people who really love people and care about people. And that's what they're supposed to do. And they're supposed to be seen as one, as a community, united. Pretty interesting, right? So what do we do with that? I think one of the things is with a verse like this is we've become completely complacent with it. We've become completely complacent with this idea of one. And even people who often talk about tolerance and equality, we also very often become complacent as well, because we only sometimes practice that work within what we see within our eyesight, with what we see within our own world, and then we don't really, as soon as it starts getting into other countries and other areas and things like that, we're not talking about it, and it's, well, it's just not really on my radar or something like that. And I think it's important that we allow those things to be on our radar, and we try to keep those things on our radar, because there's so much human suffering happening in the world, and I do believe there's not enough people speaking out against it, especially in the church world. So we have to be careful that we don't become complacent with other people's lack of unity in their lives, a lack of equality in their lives. I think we've lost the true understanding of equality. I think that has a lot to do with partisanship often, the fact that we get this type of thinking of goodies and baddies, and right versus left, and this here's your choices, and I think if we really want to look at the true think about equality, we have to think of it in a non-partisan way. We have to think of it in a way for everyone to participate in, and we have to think of it in a non-violent way as well, and that's comes from some of my upbringing and my studies of Dr. King. In some ways, for me, this might be the most important verse for equality and peace, but we have been taught not to imagine that. We've been taught to imagine such a world as kind of a utopian dream, to kind of this idea where we're all equal and we all love each other. We gotta have, and I don't have a problem with leadership. I don't have a problem with work. I'm not saying like we're all gonna there's not going to be bosses and things like that. I mean, I understand how the world works. I understand how leadership works. But what I'm understanding is that like my trans brother and sisters shouldn't be being used as a pawn in a game to be kicked out of the military. They should have all the same rights in the military as anyone else does. I remember when I was 15 or 16 and I worked at a Christian television station, and I would argue gay rights with people who worked there. And they would always think that it was somehow special rights. And they're going, oh, why should gay people get special rights? I'm like, I'm not saying special rights. I'm just saying equal rights. Like they should be able to get married, and they should be able to have insurance, and they should be recognized. I'm just, it shouldn't keep them from getting work and all this stuff. And that was when I was 16. I'll be 50 in December. So, it's constant kind of like, we always want to kind of change the way we see things. And or we want to see it as a utopian dream, especially when it comes to ideas of peace and no longer having war. We talk about arguing well, but one of the reasons we talk about arguing well is because when we don't argue well, often the opportunity is war. And I believe like nonviolence takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to be willing to argue things out. It takes a lot of courage to be willing to discuss peace with others. It takes a lot of courage to disagree. It takes a lot of patience to stand within that and to keep hope in that. But unfortunately, we often just accept the war. Going straight to war is more of an acceptable idea. And I think it's become unacceptable because we've turned peace into a utopian dream that I think is a fundamental flaw with humans for some reason. We're starting to see, like when Dr. King said, I have a dream. We often treat Dr. King's dream as just that. It's just a dream. It's just a dream. It was a beautiful dream. He did some great things. It was great, but that's a utopian dream. And I get tired of this whitewashing of King and then saying, well, we're going to just let this be a utopian dream. We can't really do it. We can't really stop wars. We can't really do this stuff. And the fact is we can, and we should be willing to do that. And we can do that with what you saw yesterday all over the world. You can do that with tough conversations. You can do that with nonviolent action. And that's something very vital and important that I think we should be willing to practice. Where do we go with this next? We're one of the things I think we have to do is think about nonviolence as not a nice thing to think about, but an actual force, an actual way of working. That unarmed truth is the greatest force on earth. I have a banner in my room. It's an MLK quote from the 60s. It's an old flag from the 60s a friend of mine gave me, and it hangs in my room, and I see that every day. And why you say, well, Jay, what does this have to do with there's no longer Jew or Greek or there's no longer slave? It's because that's the idea, is that we are one human family and that we fight for one another. And I'm like, oh, we're all colorblind and we don't see the differences. We can do that. But we also don't practice hierarchy in any way, even if it's hierarchy of suffering. Because often we'll say, well, I've just brought it worse than you and you don't understand. And we're constantly looking for ways to separate one another. And this whole book of Galatians is about bringing people together. And we're going to look at it a little bit more. I'm going to jump way ahead to the very end in a few minutes. But I want to go through some of the stuff that I've been thinking about. Of nonviolence, and why this is something that I believe goes along with being one and being united and being a human family. I think we have to begin to look at we must face the moral cost of war. We've got to face that we have really lost a lot when we look at war. When we are able to ignore there's a war in Congo that we don't really see anything of, that the press really barely talks about, for one. But we also have Israel and Palestine that's happening, and everything that's going on with Gaza as well. And we're able to, like, a lot of folks I saw were able to really cut that off and cut that suffering off during the election, especially during the last few months of the election. And we just don't realize the moral cost of that for us. To say, well, those aren't my people, those aren't my countrymen, those aren't my, Hamas is violent, and I don't agree with Israel. 100 children died in a day. I just saw video footage of ambulances being shot up with bullets. What happened in October when Hamas attacked Israel. I mean, all those things are horrific. You got two violent groups using violence. And why we must demand nonviolence, why we must demand ceasefires and things like that, is because we are all one. There are not Jews and there are no Palestinians. That is a thing, an accident of birth that we have set up and created war. There's no Jewish religion and then no, what's the word I'm looking for? What is the word I'm looking for? Sorry, I lose words sometimes and it really drives me crazy. We'll get back to it in a second. Muslims. There's no Muslim, Jew and Muslims. No Jew or Muslims. You know what I mean? These are things. There are, obviously. And we respect those differences, but we should not be killing over those differences. Go, Jay, you don't understand. There's just so much history there. And you're so naive. And there's no way to do it. But I've seen nonviolence work. One of the reasons I love John Hume is because he helped to bring peace to a 30-year civil war in Northern Ireland. And I believe there are better ways. We did see a ceasefire for a small time. And I think there are better ways that if we are going to be involved as a country, rather than sending missiles and bombs, that we are sending peacemakers and peacekeepers, and we are setting rules and regulations for tough negotiation, not constant killing of innocent civilians on either side. Do you hear me? It's not just Israel and Palestine and the U.S. and the U.K., which supported that war as well, but us as individuals. What are we willing to compromise? And at what cost are we willing to be quiet and not listen and not speak of and to ignore the suffering and the total horror of the loss of others? So politics are often set, and even religions are often set up and unfortunately run by people who have realized, even if it's unconsciously and become just really good at it, is that using our identities as marks is to put us against one another. It really, really works well. And if you happen to be one of those identities that a politician or a church really clings on to and says, well, you're special and we've got your back, it becomes really hard to question them when they're doing horrible things. You're like, well, they're the ones who gave me rights and they're the ones who fought for this. But now they're, ignoring our calls for peace. They're ignoring our calls to stop dropping bombs. They're ignoring all these things. And so we have to be willing to speak truth to even to those in power who have helped us in the past, but to say, it's not just about us. It's not just about my community, but it's about all these different communities. We're asking for justice, not just us, but for justice. You see, I would say with war, it's going to be either nonviolence or non-existence. And that's something I think we have to think about. There's a reason that in the Beatitudes it says, blessed are the peacemaker. Love your enemies. Don't hurt those who persecute you. Pray for those who persecute you. Don't seek revenge. Stop judging others. All these things that we just kind of take for granted in this world. And if we live by them and follow by them and demand that type of idea, because it's either nonviolence or non-existence. At what point do we stop? At what point do we become the innocent bystanders of war? Are we willing to follow the truth? Are we willing to follow the truth of equality? Are we willing to follow the truth of loving our enemies, loving our neighbors as ourselves? Are we willing to follow the truth that there is no longer Jew or Greek, there is no longer slave or free, there is no longer male or female, for all are one? Are we willing to follow that truth no matter where it leads us? Are we willing to take that chance? Are we willing to be? For me, I did that in 2005, 2006. I always get the years confused because my mom died in 2007, so I believe it was late 2005, early 2006 where I became affirming. And I had to make a decision to stand up for my passion and my beliefs and lose a lot, or just be quiet and keep the status quo happy and continue my work. And I could not be silent. And that's not tooting my own horn, because really the price of that for me was really going into like obscurity and poverty. That was it. Like people are, oh, you're tickling ears, you're trying to win people over, you're trying to make money. I mean, I won a few awards, but I have one back there. But I can't hand that to my landlord and go like, hey, could I give you this for rent? So often when we do take these stands, we do lose popularity. When Martin Luther King stood up against Vietnam, people said, oh, he's become misguided. He no longer cares about the cause. He's no longer a civil rights leader. Now he's an anti-war protester. He's acting like all those hippie kids. And he lost his popularity with his own community and with the white community. People are like, oh, he should stay out of that. That's none of his business. But it was his business, because he saw his African-American brothers and sisters being killed in that war as well. He saw innocent Vietnamese people being killed. And he said, I can't be quiet anymore. I must speak up. So when we think about this, are we really willing to follow the truth no matter where it leads? Because it can lead us to painful places. It can lead us to undeserved suffering. It can become at quite a cost. But if you're a follower of Jesus, Jesus' work ended at the cross. And some people, then he rose in 3 days. But, let's look at the cross there. Dr. King's, where did it lead? When you follow your compassion, your convictions, when you follow these things and you're willing to follow the truth no matter where it leads, then it often leads to a dark place at times. But sometimes it brings peace. John Hume, for example, he died of old age. He helped bring peace. But his house was also firebombed. He also went through a lot. People tried to kidnap his daughter, ended up kidnapping the wrong person. So these are the reactions. This is when we fight for equality, when we fight to have everybody. And there also comes in that nasty word compromise. Compromise is sometimes a good word, sometimes a bad word. It's got a lot of nuance, but he realized there had to be compromise for everybody to be at the table and everybody had to make a decision about Ireland together. It couldn't just be one or the other. And so being nonpartisan can also get you kicked out of your group. I mean, I feel like that it's harder for liberals to accept other liberals than it is conservatives. I feel like conservatives are just like, even if you're like, I love gay people, but I'm financially conservative, like, come on in, we'll work that other thing out later. Like they're all, with us, we're just like, oh, what do you believe about this? What do you believe about that? Becomes like liberals have become like a denomination. Like, well, do you believe in, whatever, pre or post, I don't even think about those. Think about that anymore. But do you speak in tongues? Are you free will or predestination? Post trib, mid trib, in no trib. So we become this very like group that's willing to not compromise. And when he's saying there's no longer Jew or Greek, when the Apostle Paul is saying this to the Galatians, he's knowing that there's going to have to be compromise for them to do that. Like he's like, Jews practice your event, but you can't cast these people out, and you don't need to be sitting at other tables. You don't need to be separating from yourself. You got to stop going after each other, biting and devouring one another. You're going to destroy one another. He literally says, beware of destroying one another. So he sees this happening here. This is what he's saying to those folks, and I'm just trying to take this and amplify it into the story that we find ourselves in right now. It's what Martin Luther King called the creative minority. Are you willing to join the creative minority? And there's no more minority than the creative minority. Look at us. There's 3 of us online right now? 4 if you include me. Will you join the creative minority? Now it's growing. We saw people standing up for the rights. You probably had Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and all sorts of different folks out on the streets yesterday, which is really beautiful. But are we prepared to struggle and suffer to reach the promised land? One of King's sermons, he would say, there was all these different types of people who during Exodus that some wanted to go back to Egypt. They just didn't want to make the road to the promised land. And he said, then there was other people who wanted to go to the promised land, but they didn't want to make sacrifices about their own lives and their own comfort and with their own people. They didn't want to make those sacrifices. And he said, but then there was this creative minority of people who said, we will do whatever it takes to get to the promised land, no matter how much suffering, no matter how much we have to go through. And I know you're probably saying, Jay, I can't handle it. And I get it. I get it too. There's times I don't want to do this anymore. And I often really do. I try to reach out to other communities and other people and say, hey, can we work together? Can we do stuff together? And it really, honestly, usually doesn't work out because they're so busy and they got their own thing and stuff like that. And, you're trying to create a community or at least a group of believers or leaders to say, hey, can we at least just be there for each other? It's not easy. So you kind of have to be prepared for the struggle and the suffering to reach the promised land. So when we think about the creative minority, the real minority of those of us are willing to put all on the line to be nonconformist. And here's the thing about that is too, what comes with that is it's not to do it in bitter terms. It's not to make us bitter and more angry. And often what you see is people are like, well, it's not my job to explain to you what to say. Or we get, I remember one time defending a minority group once because I got angry and somebody said something and I got real mad, and then they pulled me aside and they go, that's not your place to do that, And I think what we have to do is get to the point where we try to understand each other, at least when we're working together for something greater. That we try to give a little bit more grace to those of us who are trying to be the, the creative minority. To those who are trying to be the non-conformists, who also want to have a long view. The problem is we're so short-sighted sometimes that we don't have the long view, but that must be part of it. That must be part of understanding the bigger picture. That's why I think it has to be a non-partisan type of thing. It has to be a non-religious type of thing. Am I using Christianity to explain it? Yes. Am I using MLK to explain it? Yes. I'm using the best tools that I have to explain this. But I think we have to really get beyond that and see what we're seeing here is where he's saying there's not even male or female in this work. Of course we see each other's differences. Of course we can recognize one another's sufferings. But when it really boils down to it, it's equality. We're working for each other. There is neither, Jew or Palestinian. We're working for human rights. We're working for humans' rights to live. And this is a big thing. I honestly, I feel like this does nothing sometimes. I feel like I'm just like, and everybody's like, that's adorable. He's been through a lot. But that's if we really want to see change. Otherwise, we can pretend like it, and we can talk about it, and we can virtue signal to each other, and we can yell at each other online all the time and doom scroll and see nothing happen. Or we can start to say, okay, these are the decisions that we're going to have to make, and these are tough decisions. So to be the creative minority that King spoke of. And we don't do it to humiliate the opposition either. And that's another thing. It's like, if we want to do this and we really realize that we are the creative minority who's trying to bring unity, who's trying to recognize that all people are human, we are all one. If we're trying to do that, then we don't do it to humiliate those who are oppressing us. We don't humiliate the oppressor, or what King would have said. We don't do it to humiliate the white man. We do it, but we do it to win their understanding, to help them understand, to help them grow. So when we do this type of work, it's not us against the world and we'll destroy them. No, it's us against, trying to create understanding. That's the beauty of nonviolence, is it's trying to convert. It's trying to lead to repentance, a change of mind, a new understanding. And so we don't become, we're not trying to humiliate people. And that's what I see so often online with even some of my closest friends. And so, is this constant need to scapegoat and humiliate and bash the other side. And to me, that's not going to get us anywhere. Treating people like it's too late, or they're too conservative, they're too this, and there's no hope. That's not grace. I just had a sign that fell down because I put it up there earlier. Grace is anarchy. That's why we say grace is anarchy. It's to find a place of grace for those folks to help lead them and win understanding with them. Do I wish I had not caught this? Sometimes I wish I believed in violence, or just believed in anger, or was better at scapegoating, because all that stuff is so much easier to do. It often gets you a lot more followers. It often gets you a lot more popularity. And I haven't been able to take that bait. It's just not what I want to do. I really do want to take the road less traveled. And I do want to practice the tough, hard things that people like Jesus and the Apostle Paul and Martin Luther King encourage us to do, the real hard work of it. And sometimes that just leads to having to have a bunch of other jobs in order to talk about this stuff. And that's where I'm at. That's not saying that's, oh, poor me, I'm suffering because I have to work, but just, I have to do stuff that I didn't train my whole life for. And that's okay. And a lot of you probably do the same. So how are we truly one? How do we work that out? I wanted to just read something that just a little bit from Martin Luther King's sermon that he had done on Matthew. And he said, I think it was on Matthew 11, he said, "I have learned now that the master's burden is light precisely when we take the yoke upon us. My personal trials have also taught me the value of unmerited suffering." And I love that, unmerited suffering, because we always talk about, what is grace? Unmerited favor? Oh, undeserved favor? I like that. Undeserved suffering, we're not like, oh, I want that. Most of us have rebelled against unmerited suffering. But this is what it's going to take for us to really see each other as one, and to really care about human life, and to really care about human rights and justice, the type of justice that allows all people to have the benefit of the doubt, to pay their bills, to have, 60% of us are living in poverty, almost in poverty, to fight for the equality of others, to fight for the justice of others. It's going to take unmerited suffering. And I would almost go in to say is that if someone would ask me what grace is, I would not say it's only unmerited favor, but it's also unmerited suffering once you realize the power of grace and how much it really does cover. As my suffering mounted, I soon realized that there were two ways I can respond to my situation: either to react with bitterness, which it's easy to do. I fall into that all the time. Or seek to transform the suffering into a creative force. And that's honestly for me what revolution has always been, in a way, is taking the suffering that I went through in earlier years, was the suffering that I'd seen my family go through and the loss that I experienced with them and the rejection I felt from the church, and try to take all that and not make it bitterness. A lot of bitterness came with me, but I, over the years, really worked to let that go. And turn that suffering into a creative force. Another word for nonviolence is soul force. soul force. And so to turn it into a creative force that sees that Galatians 3:28 is true for everyone, not just those in Christ, but all of us. And that we don't scapegoat one another, but that we're working together, and that we're hoping to win understanding with those who disagree with us, and to those we are arguing with, and to those that we are protesting against, is the hope to win understanding, or to get somewhat type of understanding that we can change things, that justice can take place, a justice that hopefully is a nonviolent justice. But we need, you just can't have peace without justice, because then it's just kind of like, oh, well, everybody's just back at where they were again. If we just wanted peace, that, as being someone who's not a big fan of, I was kind of a former people pleaser, so not really a fan of having conflict, and I've had to learn to just live into conflict and accept it where it's at, and try to be a creative force within that suffering. King goes on to say, I decided to follow the latter course, creative the suffering into a career. I have lived these last few years with the conviction that the unearned suffering is redemptive. The suffering and agonizing moments, though, which I have passed over the last few years, have also drawn me closer to God. Real inclusion, folks. That's real inclusion. That's the real tolerance there. We're willing to be tolerant to get to the point to win understanding with our enemies. One of the things King said after having that revelation, talking about that revelation, he goes, be assured that we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. And that's the thing. King said, we will love you and we will suffer. Because we love you, we will suffer, and we will wear you down with our ability to suffer. You can lock us up, you can put us in jail. When Dr. King would be brought in and they said, you can do 2 weeks in prison, or you can pay a $14 fine, MLK would say, put me in the prison. He didn't even want to give money to he wanted to cost them money. He wanted to show them, I will suffer, you can cause me to suffer. And to the point where sometimes his enemies were his best allies, because they were the ones that showed how unhinged his enemies were, how unhinged those who fought against equality were, and how far they were willing to go and put their morality aside for that, and kind of woke up America. At times, some of his enemies would pay for his bail, because they're like, wow, we don't want him to have any more, we don't want people noticing what he's doing, so we'll pay the $14, So they just put him through hell, put him through a trial, and then, well, we don't want him to go to jail, so we'll pay this stuff. That's the interestingness, the beauty of this man's work, is that, no matter what his enemies did, they were kind of faced with this idea that they had to see themselves, and had to see what they were doing, and had to realize what others were seeing that they were doing. We will win you in the process, MLK said. That's the part of it. That's the part of, to win understanding, because what we will win you in the process, because he believed that love is the absolute power. And I believe that too. I believe that love and grace are the absolute power that will change this world. I believe that we can demand ceasefires, we can demand these things, we can demand equal rights, we can stand up for those folks. You have so many choices of things that you can work towards, that you can use nonviolence with, that you can use nonviolence resistance with at this point in our world. And it grows the more that we see each other as human beings. And remember, it's not to humiliate the white man or the other, but to win their understanding. And so we can't forget about redemption. And this is what I wanted to talk, and I'll end with here in Galatians, is one of the really beautiful parts of this. Is here you have this verse. And we're going to go through all this in the next couple of weeks. But you have this where he's like, there's neither male nor female, nor Jew nor Gentile, nor slave nor free, for all are one in Jesus Christ, And he goes on to explain even more about grace and Abraham and all this stuff further down in these verses when we get into 4 and explain to us, just really beat in the fact that we are equal, that we are one. And he goes in and he gives warnings about, beware of destroying each other, devouring one another. When you get into these identity politics and when you get into the hierarchy, you're just separating one another. And I love this at 6. In verse 6, and I just felt like this was so important to read, is that he doesn't forget he doesn't forget about the persecutors in this. He says, my friends, in 6:1, he goes, my friends, if anyone is detected in transgression, you who have received the Spirit should restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness. Now here it would be easy to argue that the transgression in this, what he's speaking out, is not just normal transgressions, but it is also legalism. And that it's separate, and that it's someone who's become, believes in a hierarchy, someone who believes that people should have to do what they do and live like they live. And I'm saying when those people have fallen, you need to humbly and gently restore them. Now, why do I believe it's this? Is because the next line, he goes, take care that you yourself are not tempted. And that's why I think he's talking about the very judgmental Judaizers, as what this group was called, who was coming in saying, oh, Paul's not a real apostle, and you need to be Jewish, you need to go all these traditions in order to be a real Christian, to these Gaul Gentiles. But when he says, take care that you yourself are not tempted, I mean, I will say that order is tempting. Legalism is very tempting because legalism brings order. It's like having unquestionable faith, no doubt. I liked it sometimes in my life when I was like, well, I just don't question anything. The Bible says it, that's the way God settled it, and it's done, and just, I'm going to live this way and have all certainty. But there is no certainty in this world, but it's nice to think that we have certainty. When you're in those moments, it can be ignorance is bliss type of thing. And the reason a lot of these people practice legalism because it gives them control. It gives them a world that they feel like they can control, people they can control, communities they can control. They can tell you when you're in and when you're out by your rules and your regulations or by your identity and all these things. And so they get comforted in that. And what he's saying is don't let yourself fall back into that situation. Don't fall into a situation where they tempt you into going like, well, don't you want order? Don't you want this? I mean, if everybody's equal, then, how do we really rule well? How do we do this? How do we get, And so he's saying, this is how, be careful not to fall into those temptations. Be careful not to, for me, I always want to fall into the temptation of it's complicated, Jay. You don't understand it, and we have to have this type of war. You don't, and I will listen. I listen. You can ask my friends. I have people who contact me and say, Jay, I think you're being, you're showing too much stuff that's happening in Gaza and not enough stuff about Israel. So I said, okay, tell me, what do I need to talk about? Tell me what I'm missing here. And I ask to have those conversations with folks. And I've had some heated ones and I've had some not so heated ones, but I've had those conversations. But there's often a temptation to just go like, okay, I'm just going to put my cards down because I'm just too tired. I got too many people I care about, or too many people some people I have in respect, telling me I'm naive by believing in nonviolence and by believing in grace and by believing in this concept of hard conversations and ceasefire where we have to have tough negotiations and we set boundaries and we do things like, because everybody's like, give me an answer. What are you going to do? Get peace. How are we going to get peace? So they want answers. So I have to think about that, So there is that temptation to fall into that, okay, you're right. I'll just shut up, and I'll just, focus on my transgender brothers and sisters, equality in the military, and everything else I'll just shut up about. But no, I'm going to talk about it all. And I'm going to talk about it on the same context of all of this, is that we are one. And so we should be just as worried about our trans brothers and sisters in the military as we are about our Gaza brothers and sisters dying, as much as what will happen if there's not peace, and what will happen to our Israel brothers and sisters if there's not peace. What will happen to them? And anyway, we're looking for a restoration to say we want to see an end to war, we want to see an end to hate, and we want to see an end to killing. All of it. It's a vicious cycle. That's why King often spoke about nonviolence. And it's just, he's like, if we just, if they kill 3 of us and then we go back and kill another one of them, they're going to kill 5 of us and then we're going to go back and kill 3 of them and then kill 10 of, and it's just a vicious cycle that never ends and never gets anywhere. And we have to be willing to sit down and have conversations and realize, are there things that we're willing to compromise so we can all have a seat at the table? We talk a lot about seats at the table in this world and in the church, but we don't often talk about what it takes to be at that table together, and often the things that we have to do and who are we willing to work with. And are we willing to work with people that we disagree for the greater good? And I think that's part of the sacrifice, and I think that's part of the suffering. I don't think it's just going to jail and just being beat up or just being talked bad to, but it's also saying there's just certain things that I'm going to have to give up, they're going to have to give up, and we're going to have to do this together. Because we don't live in a utopian society. So I'm not saying this is a utopian dream. I'm just saying this is a way that goes and allows people to be alive, allows people to have justice, and continues to direct us into more of a equal way of being one in human beings, and not ignoring. Like I said, I want to make clear, I'm not saying we ignore one another's differences. We just don't have a hierarchy. We don't even have a hierarchy of suffering. What we do is we recognize each other, and we're there for one another, and we can help each other, and we can empathize with one another, and we can sympathize with one another. That's why those emotions to me are so beautiful, and I get so angry when somebody tries to say empathy is sin. We grow from that when we learn from that, and we might along the way realize we've missed something and grow from that even more, and that's fantastic. That's the great thing of having diverse friends and people, not just of color and sexuality, but people who think diversely. Often you can, if you sit down and go, how do you see me? Something I learned from Pete Rollins is you talk to somebody and you go, how do you see me? And you find out how they see you and how they think about you. How do you see what I'm saying is dangerous? Why? And why do you say that? And how am I, and at least gives you a little bit more of understanding. But sometimes, and it just sharpens often, makes us stronger and allows us to be better communicators and better workers for a better world. And that's ultimately what I'm working for, is a safer world for all people. And I think that's the work of this faith, believe it or not. It goes on to say, take care of yourself that you're not tempted, but bear one another's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. And it goes on to say, if those, listen to this is the important part. We'll end on this, 3, right here, 6:3. For if those who are nothing think they are something, they deceive themselves. The New Living Translation says, if you think you're too important to help someone, you're just kidding yourself, you're really a nobody. This one says, this is more accurate though, for if those who are nothing think they are something, they deceive themselves. So when we think we're better than others, or when we think we can ignore each other, or we think we're too good to restore, or we think we shouldn't restore, or we can't restore, we're fooling ourselves. You can always play a part in people's restoration and giving people hope and believing in them. That's always a part of this work. It's always there. You might think, well, they're different. Having to explain one time to this pastor about why did your dad go with those conservatives and do all that? And I'm like, because they came to restore him. They gave him a house to live in. When he got out of prison, they talked to him. They cared about him. The only other person who really understood that, what's funny, is this guy who's kind of I would say maybe an atheist, but I was on his show and he was like, isn't it weird that, people don't see that the reason that your dad kind of went that way is a lot of those people came to help him at the end? And I'm like, yeah. It's kind of weird because also those are some of the same people who hurt him. But yeah, it is weird that way. And why that happens is because people other denominations, well, that's not my problem. That's not my issue. I don't have to worry about those folks. I don't have to, their restoration has nothing to do with me. And you're still fooling yourself because you may even think I'm not important enough to help them, but you're really saying they're not. You're asking, well, it's nothing. You're thinking about what does it has to do with me, rather than asking the question, what's going to happen to them if someone doesn't step in, and especially someone with a kind, loving heart. What's going to happen to them if I don't step in, And that's the problem. I see it so often when I see people who just condemn people who've made mistakes and fallen and stuff, and they just jump on the bandwagon and dance on the graves. And I'm going you shouldn't be dancing on the graves. You should be running in there. Well, if they restore, they'll go back to doing whatever they want. Well, they might if you don't go in there. But if you go in there, you might be able to make a difference because you've got that on your mind. Don't sell yourself short, folks. You can do much more. And it's not an impossible dream, I don't think. So that's my talk today, partially taken from King as usual, as of late, just because of the state of the world. But I think that's ways we need to be thinking is how can we live in unarmed truth, and how can we care about everyone, and are we willing to be must have not got enough sleep last night. Are we willing to be the creative minority? Are you willing to be part of the creative minority? Are you prepared to struggle and suffer to reach the promised land? and do that to help others reach the promised land. We just celebrated the anniversary of Dr. King's murder, and the night before he last spoke, he's I might not get there with you, but I've seen the promised land. It was beautiful, and he didn't get there. But are you prepared to even maybe miss out on the promised land to help others get there? And I think those are the tough questions and the hard decisions that we have to make. And I think there's going to be a lot of sacrifice in the future that requires us to do this type of work. And I don't know if we're all cut out for it, but I hope we can do it with each other and take it one minute at a time. We got to do it. We are in troubled times, and we can cause good trouble. We can do good trouble, make good trouble. But part of doing that is being prepared to struggle and suffer and be honest about it and where we're at. And that's where we're headed. But my kids need it. Your kids need it. The future needs it. People right now desperately need it. And if you just knew how much a little hope goes, just giving somebody just a little bit of hope, how far that goes. Just listening to someone. Even disagreeing with them. Like this guy, we argued, and we just could not come to an agreement, but we had a lot of other things that we had in common about our past and different things like that. And so we just kind of changed gears and talked about some of that stuff to kind of remind ourselves, hey, we do like each other. We do have things in common, so we can go back and have these arguments again, and sometimes that's how it goes. So not everything, you can't see everything as black and white and good and bad. And, binary thinking has really screwed us up. And so love you all. Much grace to you all. I'm here for you. I hope we can do more of this together. I am meeting with a good buddy of mine this week to talk about the future of revolution and what we are going to do. My friend Brian Yarborough, who I've loved for years, he used to run Anchor Church. He was part of another church when I first met him, and now he's a business guy, but he had miles, and so he got me a ticket. I was going to fly out to Houston to meet him, and he said, why don't we just meet out in Las Vegas and see the Punk Rock Museum together and take a couple days to kind of go over some thoughts and ideas for the future of revolution and how we can help revolution continue to grow and be something that's you can make a living at, and you can continue to spread the word and get that out there even more. So that's what we're going to be doing this coming weekend. We'll probably be putting some videos up here on YouTube live from Las Vegas of some of the things that me and Brian are talking about. And if you guys have suggestions, you can leave them here. Or a great place to say is like, hey, what have you thought about this? Is DM me on Instagram. That's where I get most of my DMs. So thank you all so much. Oh, I got to remember. Always got to remember. I always hear Steve's voice. Jay, don't forget to ask for support. Revolution needs your support. I'm not getting full paychecks, but I am working other jobs. But it has been a real tight few weeks. Revolution's got bills to pay as well. We put those bills over my pay to make sure that stuff gets taken care of. But we need your support, and you can support us. We're a 501c3. We'd rather have you than your money, as always. But we are a 501c3, and you can make a donation by going to revolutionchurch.com. And we have a PayPal and a Venmo. I have just realized that I can finally, I've been having issues with the email on PayPal writing thank you notes. On on Venmo, I can just write it in the notes where you send something, there's those notes, and I can just put, oh, thank you so much. So I finally got the first part of those thank yous out. And this week I will be working on the second portion of thank yous for people who've given through PayPal. But for a while, they weren't going through because Google has got my email set up so weird that I've got one on my iPhone and then a base for my email. And it was just going to the base and it wasn't going out from my iPhone. Working on that, folks. Thank you, Christine. I can use your prayers so much. Another way you can help support Revolution is by liking and subscribing to this channel. That really helps if you subscribe. Liking also really helps. Sharing this with other people on social media really helps as well. There's other ways you can get that message out. And if you like what we're doing, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to Revolution Church. We could really use it right now. Thank you all so much. Much grace. And I will be talking to you next strangely enough, from all places, Las Vegas, so we can go see a punk rock museum and talk about what the future of revolution holds. Bye-bye.